Hello everybody and welcome back to part 5 of our Corvette build. This is the Revell 144 scale kit. In the last part, you remember I built the basic structure of the bridge, and in this part I'm going to carry on and do the funnel base and the signals platform as well. That's another part of the superstructure just after the bridge, and I'll build the funnel as well and detail it. That'll just leave the after superstructure on the quarterdeck to do, and I'll cover that in the next episode next week. So in this part there's quite a bit of etched brass work to do on these superstructure parts, and the funnel itself is quite a complex structure with both etched brass and turn brass parts in it as well. So we better make a start. We'll get over to the bench, get those Revell parts cut out, and we can see how this superstructure goes together. Okay, so for this session, the first thing I'm going to do is build the funnel base. And there's also a piece of superstructure just ahead of that, which I'll also do at this point. So let's just get the Revell parts off that we need. So this is the funnel base, and the other piece of superstructure that I'm going to be doing today is made up from a few parts, so we'll get those off. It's a bit of a nuisance with these Revell sprues that the parts are not in any numerical order. So this part up here is G152. And we've got 116 at the opposite end of the sprue, and in between we've got a 31, a 219, so they're all over the place. So Revell haven't made it easy for us there particularly. I don't know why they would number them in that order, but they do, and it's a bit of a pain. So I'm going to leave the funnel base for the moment, because this piece of superstructure obviously needs gluing together, and I might as well do that first so that it's got time to set. But first I just need to remove some of the Revell parts, some of these protrusions. I'll do that, most of that with the chisel blade. This has a replacement deck from brass fitted to it, so I don't have to spend loads of time tidying it up. As long as it's flat, that's all I need to worry about. So I'll just use a file to roughly get the bits of plastic flush. Actually, this whole box in the centre needs to come away. I'll just get the brass part just to check whether or not I've got that flush. The deck piece for this platform, which I think is a signals platform actually, it's got a flag locker fitted to it a bit later on in the build. But the deck overlay isn't numbered in the Pontos instructions, so I'm going to have to go through all the frets until I recognise the part. So it's this part here, which is 306 on fret 3. This plastic moulding here is a bit too wide to fit through the hole that's in the deck part, so I'm just thinning that out a little bit. I don't want to force it, otherwise we could end up distorting the brass. So I'll just thin it out a little bit. So that's just enough to ease it in to position as we want it. Okay, so that's a good fit now. We don't need this ladder. Presumably there's some brass replacements for that. And on this part here we have a door to remove, so they're just easily scraped off. Okay, so that's the parts prepared. Not much to do there. So I'll get this glued together now that it can be setting whilst we start some work on the funnel base. So once this is dry, I'll give it a good clean up. And I'm going to need to, because I've been really clumsy today for some reason. So I've got glue all over the place with that. But as I said, we'll get it cleaned up. Make sure all the joins on the bulkhead are nice and tight, just to minimise the amount of work that we've got to do with that. And the replacement deck fits on top like that. So I'll just put that to one side whilst we get the funnel base sorted out. There's nothing to remove on this. We can use it as it is. It just needs a clean up. A bit of flash around the bottom of this part, which is just as well to remove that. And then we've got a new deck for the funnel base as well, which is this part here. Again, these mouldings are a little bit tight, but the part will fit. And we have these side pieces, so kind of a flange really, with bolt head detail in it, and that folds down to the side. So I'll do those bends now. So they obviously just go down through 90 degrees. And I need the long pliers for these side pieces and the front piece. Just need to be careful with this because we've got this very thin piece of brass here next to this opening, and that's wanting to go with the bend. So I just need to pin that so that it doesn't move. So they're all bent. Let's test fit it again. Okay, that's a nice fit. See, this rear flange here covers up this slot in the moulding. The next thing I'm going to do is to glue the plastic funnel parts together, and again that's so that it can be drying. The funnel has a brass overlay on it with the bolt detail, but first of all we've just got to glue the two parts of the funnel together. And again, that can set up. I'll leave it overnight and come back tomorrow and clean it up. This is the funnel cap. And there's quite a bit to do with this actually, because we need to remove all the cage detail from the top. There's a brass cage to go over the top. But we've also got to hollow out the centre of this. We have to widen the diameter of the hole here because there's a brass part to fit inside. We'll do that, and then I have the funnel that I glued up yesterday, that should be nice and dry now, so we'll sort that out as well with the lining that goes on the outside. So all the detail on the funnel needs to be removed, so just get a completely smooth cylinder in the end. So there's a couple of bands at either end. The seam line doesn't have to be perfect on this because obviously we're covering it up, but it does need to be fairly smooth because we don't want the brass kinking underneath it. Okay, so I think we've got it. So this is the funnel base that we built yesterday. Okay, I think that's going to be all right. The funnel is keyed in the Revell kit, and that's obviously because it's got a slight backward rake on it. You can see there how it slopes back slightly. So next I want the two brass parts for the lining of the main funnel part and also the internal lining. So there's a little indicator here, there's a little notch cut in the edge of the Pontos part, and that fits over this hole here on the funnel, and that's obviously got to wrap around the funnel, but it's going to be far too stiff to try and do that without annealing it, so that's the first thing that I'll do with this part. Now we have to open the funnel cap out to 15mm. It's currently nearly 13, so about 1mm all the way around, and then this brass sheet rolls around and fits to the inside just to line the new opening. So I'll just go around and get that cut out a little bit more. Just do it with a knife to start with, and then I'll finish off with a round file. So obviously this needs to be circular, but I'll just use the outside ring of the funnel just as a reference for it. So just gently shave off the plastic all the way around. 15mm is almost to the edge of the moulding here. And I'm just going to use hand tools for this all the time. I'm not going to try and use the motor tool to open this out, because if I make a slip with the motor tool, this is quite a difficult shape to reproduce. So it's just a case of working very slowly until we get the diameter that we want on this circle. So we're up to 13.5. I'm thinking we must be somewhere near, because there's hardly anything left on that now. 14.5. At this stage, because we're so close, I'll prepare the brass part that fits inside here. So this part here, 291, we're going to roll that and fit it inside. And I might just need to make some more adjustments to this diameter just to get that to fit properly. But the next step is to roll these up. And to do that, I'm going to anneal them. I just use a standard sort of cooking blowtorch to do that. So the purpose of this is just to soften the brass a little bit, and it also removes the spring out of the metal as well, so we'll be able to form it around the funnel a bit easier, and it'll also be more likely to stay in position once we have done the annealing. Because if we don't, there'll be a tendency for the edges to start springing away later on, which obviously won't be very good if we've already painted the funnel. So we should see a change in colour, which no need to worry about that, it's not a problem. So that will do. Don't need to overheat it, don't want to damage it. So that's all we need to do with those. And we should find that they will roll an awful lot easier. So I can use this knife handle to start to do that rolling. And what I try and do with these is to make sure that the edges here are over tightened, if you like, or over rolled, and that just helps them cling on to the curvature of the funnel a little bit better. So you can see that's staying where we've bent it to, which is what we're after. Just clean that bit of debris. It was a dirty pair of tweezers that I used, so that dirt's burnt off onto the brass part. So that's the foil rolled up. You can see we've actually gone further than we needed to, but that will just help the part cling on to the funnel. So let's see how that goes. So you can see how that's pretty formed to the shape of the funnel. So we're not going to have any problems with that. When that's glued, we're not going to have any problems with it trying to spring away. It's nice and tight there at the front, and that's because we really put some pressure on the edge of the brass after it's been annealed, and having been annealed, it's not going to move. So the little slot in the Pontos part just goes in line with the hole in the Revell plastic here, and that should mean that everything's nicely lined up. So that's the funnel, and I'll epoxy that and put some bands around it just to make sure it stays nice and tight. That's come out all right. The annealing is absolutely essential for that part. It wouldn't go without heating it up. So we'll do the same for the inside of the cap. Now with this one I don't want to overbend it because it goes on the internal diameter. So I want to get it so that it more or less just meets itself. And then this goes inside the funnel cap, something like that, but we're a bit of a way off yet. There's quite a bit of overlap still on that brass. If you can see here that it's overlapping by about 3 millimeters, 2 to 3 millimeters, which means that the diameter of the opening that we've got at the top isn't quite large enough yet. So that's what I wanted to check before I cut any more away from this part. So it's a case of gradually just closing in on the fit with this. Taking too much off would open the brass up and leave a gap, and having it at the moment where it's not quite the right diameter, it's not quite wide enough, it means that we've got that overlap that we've just seen. So we'll just take a little bit more off and test fit it again. So the overlaps come down, it's probably just over 1 millimeter now. I'm going to solder this part at this stage, and that's so that I know that I've got exactly the right diameter. So I'm going to solder it from the inside. So I'll tape the outside of this together. I'm just making sure that the join line's completely closed up on the inside, and then I'll use some flux. This is just regular soldering flux. A lot of people ask me what sort of flux and solder I use, and I'm really not that sophisticated. This is just from the local plumber's merchant. So is the solder. This is just flux core solder. Again, it's just a completely off-the-shelf product, but as I'm getting more into soldering this brass. I think I'm going to need to get a bit more sophisticated with my soldering and start to use different temperature solders. So using a lower temperature solder for some of the very fine parts, and using different temperature solders to build multiple joints. But I'm not there yet, I'm not at that standard. I've just learned in this last few months how to do this sort of basic solder work. But a lot of people do ask me what sort of solder and flux I use. So that's it, it's just basic local hardware stuff. And at the moment it's doing the job. I think as I get more into the process I can learn some new techniques, but for the moment this is working for me. So just put some solder on the inside face there, and I might just put a bit at the top on the outside like that, but obviously the tape's getting in the way. I've got the iron up to temperature. I'll just go inside at the bottom. So look. Yeah, it's all good. So that should go somewhere near fitting into that funnel cap. But because I've been getting down very gradually to the 15mm, it's still tight. Of course it'll be even tighter if I don't get rid of the excess solder on the outside. I'm not too concerned about the solder on the inside. This is all going to be painted black, so it's not going to be particularly visible. It's nearly there. There's just a tiny amount to bring off that. What's happened eventually with this is that we've just taken away to the point where this inside lip of plastic has disappeared, this part here. So if you're going to be doing this yourself, that's what you need to be aiming for, really, getting the diameter down so that you take away this bottom part of the plastic moulding. But I wasn't to know that doing this straight off, so that's why I went down to the correct size very slowly. I didn't want to take too much off. But as I said, if you're going to be doing this, you've got the confidence to take that amount of material out. So the part looks like that when it's at the correct size. The brass part here is the correct size to just slide inside the Revell plastic. So I'll mix some epoxy up and we'll get the main foil, as I call them, glued to the funnel. Then it'll have 24 hours to set, just to make sure it's all completely hardened. And then we'll finish off the funnel cap as well at the same time. So this is a 2-part epoxy that I'm using. It's a 5-minute epoxy, but as I said, I'm going to leave it until tomorrow to do any more work with this. There's other things that we can be doing. Okay, so I'm just trying to work out the best way to do this, really. I think I'll just put some epoxy on the brass. And just make sure that the glue goes right to the edge of the foil. So just open that up a little bit. And I want the marker there. The problem I find with epoxy is that it's so messy, or at least it is in my hands, but it's a very strong glue, so it's good for an application like this. So that's it, we've got the little slot lined up there, so I'll just put some tape around that just to bind it in position, and I'll try and give it a little bit of a clean up before the glue sets. I've got some on the outside. That hopefully should give us a nice strong connection of the brass to the funnel. It looks alright, the bolt details all lining up. The little slot at the back is lined up, so that's looking alright. Okay, so I'll leave that to fully cure, and then we can come back and sort out the funnel cap. So this lining fits into the plastic funnel cap like that, and it just stands a little bit proud at the top. There's some bolt or rivet detail there as well, and we've got some little slots here where the frame fits into place, and then eventually that will slide down into the funnel, something like that. So I'll just get the part for the frame. So that's this part, and we're going to have to create a dome for this. I don't think it's a very severe bend, but it will need to be bent. So that will eventually fit into the little slots. So to shape this cage, I've just got a domed handled screwdriver here, which handily has got the cross point marking on it at the end. So then I can just position the part into the centre like that, and just smooth the arms down. So hopefully that should be nice and dome shaped, and that should fit into the slots in the Pontos part. So eventually it will go something like that when we glue it together. Okay, I'll do a little bit more with this funnel base while I'm waiting for the funnel parts to dry. There are 4 large vents on the funnel base, but I won't be using the Revell parts for the vents. I'm going to be getting some 3D printed vents along with some other parts for the ship. So that's going to have to wait, because the website's MicroMaster in New Zealand, they're not taking orders at the moment, or they're not allowing you to go through checkout. So I'm assuming that they're a bit behind on orders and are just trying to catch up. So I'm going to have to wait a little bit for those. But there will be a big time saver in the end, because trying to fill the Revell parts is going to be quite tedious, and I think there are 15 or 16 of them to do. So I'll get the vent set from MicroMaster and fit those later on. But there's plenty of other things that we can be doing whilst we're waiting for that. So I'll get the other parts that we need for the funnel base cut off the fret. Okay, so there are a few parts here. Obviously the first are these railings, and these have got covers on them, so they've got canvas sheet over them. Presumably that was just to keep the drafts away. Pontos provide these hatches in 3 parts, unfortunately. It'd be nice to have some resin parts for this, because they're likely to be pretty awkward to get together. Again, just because the parts are so small. So these are the bases, and they have the dogs etched into them here, and then the lid fits on the top. So again, I'm going to solder that with 2 of these. They go here either side of the funnel, and the lids will hopefully just slot on top, something like that. But we'll get those soldered up first. Just move these railings out of the way, because I'll bend them otherwise. So Pontos also give us, this is the lid by the way for this hatch, but they also give us this piece here, which Pontos wants us to form into a box. and then fit it to the lid here on this etching here. But I think it's very difficult to get a good result with that. So I'm just going to cut a piece of styrene strip and fit it to the lid instead. And I've found that you get a much neater job doing it like that. And then the other thing we have is this, what looks like a locker, which will bend up. And again, I'll just put a run of solder on the inside of this just to seal it. So I'll get the soldering iron on again. I thought I was done for today, but no, we've got a little bit more to do. So as we've done before, just some flux on the inside. I'm not going to tape this, I'll just hold it with the tweezers. That's much easier than trying to glue it together. And then we'll just push the lid down like that. Okay, so that's come out all right. The other thing that people ask me a lot about in the video comments is this, and all it is a fiberglass pen. It's just used for cleaning brass up, getting the solder off if you've got too much solder on, and they're pretty commonly available. They just have a refill inside, as you can see, but they're really good for getting the parts cleaned up if you've got a bit too much flux on or a bit too much solder. So that locker, as I think it is, fits just in the corner like that. Okay, so I've gone ahead and cemented the hatches into the positions on top of the styrene that I fitted as a box underneath there. That replaces the Pontos etched part that I didn't manage to get fitted properly. They just didn't look right, and the dogs on these etched parts just look a complete mess. I'd rather not have them on. I might think of a way of fabricating some dogs out of some wire or something like that, but I'm not going to worry about it for the time being. The next thing to do is to cement these two deck houses together, or this funnel base together with this deck house here. There's a little key on the Revell part here which fits into this slot, just to align the parts properly. So I'll get that glued up and then it'll have time to set as usual. And I've glued the deck here onto this piece of superstructure. I've got plenty of cement in there just to make sure it's nicely joined up. Just leave that for a moment, and we'll come back to the funnel, which has dried overnight, so this epoxy should be nice and hard now. So we can remove the bands that we've had to hold this together. So that's come out really nice. The join along the back is really nice and tight, so I think under a coat of primer that'll disappear altogether. That's a nice join. So the next thing I can do is fit the funnel cap. So the only thing here is to make sure that these slots here for the funnel frame, one of them is aligned with the very center line of the funnel, which is marked by this row of rivets down the back of the brass part. So that's easy enough to line up. I'll just put some thin super glue inside there, and then just checking that we get that nicely lined up. So when we come to fit the frame itself, one of the bars faces fore and aft like that. But I won't fit the frame at this stage because there's some work to do on the outside of the funnel. There's a ladder and some other piece of equipment to fit to it, so I'm going to do that next. Okay, so the first job is to fit the ladder which goes up the front side of the funnel. The ladder has a little safety hoop up towards the top, which is formed from this brass strip, so that'll be fun to fit. The first thing we'll do is just fold the sides of the ladder up. So this is a job for the long bending pliers. We need to be careful with this ladder because there's an engraving towards the top, and that's for the safety hoop. But what that engraving does, it makes the ladder a bit weak at the top and it's easy to bend over. I've just caught it once and bent it out of shape, but I managed to get it back. So the safest thing to do, I think, is to get this glued onto the funnel. That'll be the best place for it. And I think what I'm going to do is just open these holes up a little bit in the brass. So hopefully that'll just give me a bit more gluing surface to get the ladder fitted. Okay, so that's gone on. The holes, drilling the holes just makes that a little bit more secure. Otherwise it's just sort of balanced on the 6 legs really, so that's not strong enough. The next thing to do is to fold this hoop up. So it needs to be formed into a circle. So I need something like the shank of this burr. That's probably a bit too narrow. That's just going to need a little bit of heat. It's springing around a bit, so I'll just very gently warm it up. That should help it form a little bit easier. I think that's nearly there. It's not perfect, but I can just adjust it once it's on the ladder. We'll just swap to a coloured background. It's a bit easier to see the parts. So that's the safety hoop fitted. And again, it's another area where just slightly over bending the parts just helps, because forming that circle, I just made it a little bit smaller than I needed to, and that made it grip onto the side of the ladder there. So the spring effect of the brass just held it in place. Okay, so at this stage obviously it's a very delicate part with those ladders and the hoop on. Next to the ladder we need to fit a couple of pipes, and I think these are for the whistle and klaxon. So they're in a mixture of etched brass brackets and turned brass pipes. So we've got quite a few pieces of turned brass in the Pontos set. We need to identify the parts for the whistle and the siren, and as I said, they're made out of pieces of etched brass with some turned brass, and this is the schedule of turned brass in the Pontos set, or scribed brass as they describe it. And it's just worth noting with these that on occasion Pontos provide 2 parts on 1 turning. So for example, we've got this part here that has 2 sections to it, and this reel turning has 3 reels on it. So it's just worth bearing that in mind. The other thing is that it's sometimes worth checking through these to make sure that you've got them all, particularly on a more complex set with the hood, for example, there were a lot more scribe brass parts than this, and I separated them onto separate cards and numbered them all up. But there are fewer in this. There are probably just about 35 parts altogether, so it's not really worth doing that. It's easy enough to find. But sometimes the distinction between the parts is pretty small. So for example, these funnel pipes that we want, part 32, actually look very similar to the flagstaff here. They're the same length more or less. But the difference with them is that the funnel pipes have a hole drilled on the top, and we can see here where Pontos make these black markings on the drawing. It means that there's a hole or a cutout in them. So looking very carefully at the turn brass parts that we need, there are some tiny holes in the top of the two that we require. So they're the funnel pipes. They're identical. They're the only two identical parts in the bag. So we know with some certainty that they're the correct parts that we need. But it's just worth checking carefully that you're not mixing these parts up. It's very easy to do in some cases. And we have the siren here. You can see it's beautifully turned, and that needs to fold through 90 degrees. Pontos provide a tiny cutout in that to help us do that. Might just be possible to see it there. And then the last part we need is this, which is the whistle, and again this has got a cutout for the opening for the whistle in it as well. We'll see that when it's fitted and I do some close-up photographs of the parts when it's all built up. So we also need some brackets for these. That's these small parts here. The larger ones have to be folded, so like that, into a U shape. Now to fit these, the pipes themselves fit to the brackets and onto the funnel, but they also go down into these holes on the deck. So although I'm not going to glue the funnel at this stage, I do want to make sure that those pipes are aligned properly. So that means that I'll fit them with the funnel in position. I think the way to fit these is to cement these brackets here into their positions, and I'll do that because they're a bit more solid than the smaller ones. So you can see we want those to align and go down into the deck and be parallel to the ladder. So it's quite a delicate fit to get these to look right, but it will be worth it when the whole thing's done. These brackets that we've just fitted, the holes are so finely etched that it prevents the pipe going up too far. So there's a little stop on the pipe which engages in the hole and stops it moving too far up. So we'll get the small bracket now, and that just threads on from the underside, I hope. That middle bracket is extremely delicate, so I'm just going to add some extra thin super glue to that. It just needs something to lock it. I think that that's got it. It's difficult to see actually. So next up, there's just a few brackets to fit elsewhere on the funnel, just to finish it off. The first one is this, and it just needs to be folded through 180 degrees. There's a little engraved mark on the funnel where that bracket fits. So the last thing to do on this funnel is to fit the cage. Really the way I tackle these is to just get a couple of the parts located, or do them even one part at a time, or one leg at a time. Trying to get them all at the same time is virtually impossible. It's actually a little bit too domed. It's not quite reaching now. So just flatten that out a little bit. So I'm just doing these one at a time. Just let that one set up over here, then I'll do the opposite. And hopefully gradually that'll pull the funnel into shape. So with this one attached, I'll glue this next opposite one. Assemblies like this obviously get stronger as you make more connections. They're just a bit tricky to get going. Just leaving those to set for a moment before I start pulling the cage around. Okay, so just going round one by one. They've all gone into position all right. The last one just needed a little bit of bending again, just to get it to fit. And with the other 5 all fairly secure, it's possible just to do those last adjustments. So that gives a nice rounded finish all the way around. That's what we were after. That's the funnel finished. Thank goodness. And fitted to the funnel base. With it being so delicate now, I'll just put that to one side until we can prime it. So I've just got a few parts left now to put together for what I'm calling the signals platform here. So there's a flag locker and some other types of locker to put together, and these are all from etched brass again. So these first 2 here are water tanks, I believe, and Pontos provide these parts here which are meant to go into the top of these boxes, and they look to me like pipes. So I'm not going to be using those. I don't want 2-dimensional pieces like that when they're meant to represent pipes, so I'll be replacing those with some wire. But I'll fold the tanks up. I'm certain that that's what they are. So you can see the holes in the top of the tanks where the pipes fit. So as usual with these, I'll just put some flux on the inside. So they go together easily. It's something that you could do with glue, I guess. But as I've said before, the best solution really is to solder them. The next thing to do is this hatch, which is in the centre of the platform, and unfortunately it's made up of 4 parts. It's another overcomplicated setup from Pontos. So the first thing to do is to fold this box up. Now here we've got a number of fairly tight bends and little narrow strips of brass, so we just have to be careful here to not damage this part. Then we've got these hated pieces with the dogs on the side. This is one of those examples where if I was a bit more sophisticated with my soldering, I'd be able to use a low melt solder to attach this part, and I'll be able to do that without undoing all this solder that I've just finished. But that's a lesson for another day for me, so I'll just make myself content with gluing that. I must say I don't really like these parts. It's very easy to get them so they just look a mess. But the reason that they're provided like that is so that you can potentially display the hatch open. And I might do that in this case because the actual hatch lid has got some little skylight holes in it. So I'll glaze those, paint the part, glaze it, and then just attach it in an open position. We've got a full space in the deck, and if I paint the interior of this deck house in black, we won't be able to see through that. So that piece with all the dogs on it can go on like that. And we also have this surround, which again I'll also fit that. But I won't glue the hatch in place at the moment because I'll paint that separately and then just drop it on together with the separate hatch lid like that. So the last thing I've got to do is prepare the flag lockers. There are two. So these are the bodies of the flag lockers, and we also have in the Pontos instructions some coloured printed paper flags which go on the inside. So the way that I deal with these is to fold the body of the flag locker up and then just insert the flags from the underside once the whole locker's been painted, and that way we get the coloured flags showing up in the pigeonholes. But the first thing to do is to fold this up, and again I'll be soldering it just to make sure it all stays in place. The thing with these is obviously I don't want to get solder on this front face and block up the pigeonholes, so we're just going to have to be very careful just to get a tiny little bit of solder down at the bottom of the locker, just where the legs are down here. Okay, so they're the flag lockers ready, and as I said, we'll just paint those, and then the paper flags we'll just slide in. We'll attach those with a bit of PVA, and they always look nice. I like building flag lockers. I think they add a nice splash of colour to the model. The last couple of parts for this particular deck house, or the roof of it, is just some railings, and these have, again, we've got the canvas sections on them. So again, they need to be bent. That one's just a 90 degree which goes on the front edge of the platform, so that just fits onto the forward edge of the platform like that. And then this last one goes around the port side, something like that. So the last thing we have to do for this particular assembly is just fit the replacement brass door. We sanded that off earlier on in this video, and then we have 3 porthole wriggles to replace as well. This door has a separate frame, so you could pose it open if you wanted, but you'd obviously have to cut the hole out of the bulkhead there. and I'm not bothered about doing that, so I'll just glue this shut. And the last job is to do the porthole wriggles. So that's it, that's all the brass work done. And that relatively small piece of deck superstructure has turned out to take quite a bit of time to build. I think mainly because of the complications of the funnel. But anyway, it's all done now, and as before when I built the bridge base, I'm not going to paint this just yet. I'll get it in some primer. We can have a look at what it looks like actually on the ship. But I want to paint all the deck superstructure together once it's all finished, and then I get a nice consistent finish with it. And the last piece will be the main deck house, which goes aft on the quarterdeck, which I'll be doing next time. So I'll get that primed now, then we can get over to the model, have a look at what it looks like actually on the ship. Okay, so over at the ship now, and after some primer I've just roughly positioned the work that we've done this week onto the model. So the signals platform and the funnel base, with the funnel itself of course, and I've just positioned some of these railing parts just to illustrate what they might look like, but the more delicate open railings that go around the sides of this platform I've left off for the moment because I don't want to damage them. But that's come out as a nice result, I think. I'm pretty happy with that. The funnel in particular looks nice with all the detail of the siren and whistle on the front with the ladder. So I'm very happy with that. It should look nice when it's painted up. I've got a decent finish on there with the primer. So we'll be getting onto some painting soon, I hope. Okay, so that's some more progress this week with the central superstructure built, or at least roughed out. There's some more details to go on it, obviously. Next week I'll be going on to building this after superstructure, which I don't think has actually got that much brass work to do on it. There's a little bit, but not too much, so we'll see how far we get with that. So if that turns out to be a quick part of the build next week, I'll go straight ahead and give this 3 superstructure parts a coat of paint and get started with that. Obviously all 3 elements will need some more detailing parts put on them, but certainly by the time I've got this aft superstructure finished next week, the ship will start to look something like. So that aft superstructure build and possibly some painting will be coming up as usual next Friday in part 6, so I hope you'll be able to join me for that. In the meantime, this weekend I'll be doing some decal work on the Vulcan. Last week I managed to get the painting done on that build, so hopefully the gloss coat that I've applied to that will be nicely dried and I can get some decal work done. But if the Corvette's your thing, I'll see you in another week's time for that part 6. In the meantime, everybody, look after yourselves, enjoy your modelling, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.